ghosts in the hallway whispering your name. The paranormal, the unexplained. Become a VIP, get the inside scoop. Unlock the mysteries, be part of the group. Live streaming stories are talking to you. Super chats buzzing, join the group. Untold Radio Network, the secrets come alive. New episodes daily, the mysteries, 5 great guests. Super chat, it's a wild memorize. Share and subscribe, join the side where truth can hide. So if you've got the guts and you want to explore, tune into the Untold, it's what you're looking for. From aliens to ghosts and all that's unseen. Untold Radio Network, where the world's mysteries convene.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Paranormal Spectrum here on the Untold Radio Network. I'm your host, Barnaby Jones, from Cryptids, Anomalies, and the Paranormal Society. Good morning, Lee Warner, and welcome to the show. Happy Thursday to you. We are live in studio today for anybody that's tuning in here. So if you guys have any questions or comments throughout the show, throw them in the comments section on your preferred platform, and we'll get to them as soon as possible. Coming up this weekend, guys, we are streaming the Hairy Man of Dairyland, Wisconsin's Bigfoot documentary, in conjunction with the Wisconsin Bigfoot Group. This is going to be down in Campbellsport, Wisconsin. It is $5 to get in, and there will be popcorn and snacks and hot dogs. And after the screening, we will be going out on a Bigfoot hike expedition into the woods as well, followed by a campfire. So if you guys are interested in coming out and joining us, head on over to the Wisconsin Bigfoot Group on Facebook or wisconsincaps.com and click on the public events page for more information. Then coming up next week, guys, I will be at the Cedarburg Public Library talking about UFOs, UAPs, and government disclosure, Thursday, July 17th at 6 p.m. It's a free event. Head on over and check it out. Then coming up, guys, next Saturday, we are going to be with the Central Wisconsin CE5 group and PBS Wisconsin going sky watching and looking for UFOs, extraterrestrials, and all things that go zooming through our skies. This event, again, down in Adams, Wisconsin. Head on over to our public events tab to find out more. Then, guys, we are going to be at UFO Days in Elmwood, Wisconsin, July 26th, Silcon in Gaze, Illinois, September 19th and 20th, Van Meter Visitor Festival in Van Meter, Iowa, September 27th, and the Neenah Public Library, Wednesday, October 29th, for a special paranormal presentation, followed by a paranormal investigation of the library. Then, guys, next year we head down to Cape Girardeau, Missouri for CapCon, Missouri in April, and Fond du Lac, Wisconsin for CapCon, Wisconsin, May 8th through the 10th. More information on those events coming soon. That's it, guys. That's what we got coming up the rest of the year. But right now, guys, we have an awesome guest hanging out backstage, and I'm looking forward to chatting with him. So let's get into it. Joining me on the show today is the Mystic Scholar. He is dedicated to bridging the gap between profound spiritual experiences and rigorous intellectual inquiry. He has built a strong reputation for his unique ability to make deep connections beyond the veil, engage in thorough paranormal investigation and research, all underpinned by his extensive academic background in the humanities and social sciences. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the show, the Mystic Scholar. Hey man, how's it going?
Good. How are you, Barnaby?
I'm losing my voice is how I'm doing. All right. How are you? How you been? And what's going on with you?
Oh, no, I'm doing very well. Enjoying a nice day today and everything, and just trying to do. It's a lot. It's been a busy month for me. I just got back from Velisca at the Axe House. I had a nice crew that went with me to that one. I have a paranormal meetup this coming Saturday at Brumder Mansion, which that's a monthly thing right now. That's in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And there's I have a few other things lined up right now. So it's a little bit of a chaotic summer for me, but we do what we can.
Absolutely. It's good to stay busy. Otherwise you don't know what you're doing.
Exactly.
Awesome. So we're here today to talk a little bit about academia and the other weird stuff that we do. So kind of bridging this gap here. So let's kind of start out with talk a little bit about your background between your professional academic background and then as well as what you do in the paranormal and stuff.
So I'm not going to try to bore everybody because I know academia is not the sexiest of all topics. So let me just say that between my undergrad and graduate studies has primarily been within the humanities and the social sciences. For those who may not know what the humanities are, think of the arts, history, religion falls into that, social sciences, your psychology, anthropology, sociology, philosophy. And between these two areas of academia, we try to understand about humanity, we try to understand about culture. So in most of my academic training, I try to bridge not only various academic disciplines to understand, to interpret what's going on, at least between society, culture, as well as politics. But I have, over the years, tried to bridge it within the work that we do with the supernatural and somewhat of the metaphysical. And I do that because, in the humanities and social sciences, we do various research methods, quantitative. We're trying to find out what's an outcome. The best thing I've heard was from Josh Gates at a convention in Chicago where he goes, look, if we had a full body apparition before us and we made that spirit ring the bell 100 times, then we can say, oh, that's a ghost, but we don't have that luxury. we can't do that. But we still have enough collective evidence from various people to say, look, people have done similar flashlight sessions. People have done similar things. People have witnessed various things. So there's something there, it's not the perfect conditions that most quantitative researchers would say, but they have the luxury of having labs. They have the luxury of doing things that, they can, not about control, but they can do things that are a little bit more visible, if it were. So I kind of go more to what's called the qualitative route, which trying to interpret what the hell's going on, what's going on with the lived experiences. So Velisca is a good example where, not only we can talk with people's lived experience who have stayed at the house or have investigated the house, but there have been people in Villisca or in the area of Villisca who actually have lived there too. So like we can like interview those people and say, what's your experiences there? You know, like what have you seen? And that has been done before. So this is like the things I try to do in my now 15 or more years of, you know, paranormal investigations and everything. And, you know, unfortunately, you know, when it comes to paranormal research, or even like, you know, investigating, you know, cryptids as well, you know, there's make things legitimize, you need some sort of funding, you know. So the National Science Foundation is not going to provide grants for those of us who want to do it, you know. But I feel that sure, money's helpful, but there's enough people who have done the work that you and I have done, Barnaby, that says, hey, here's the evidence. All we're asking is to work with us. And what's the harm in that, you know? And there are many academics outside of myself who also do paranormal research, you know, or looking for UFOs or UAPs. So like they also see there's something there. So it's begging the question again, like, how can we like use these research methods to help us as investigators and researchers, but also tell the public, look, this is a legitimate thing. So come on board with us.
Interesting. So couple questions here. So, you know, you mentioned, you know, that, you know, we're looking at this from like a scientific point of having this apparition standing there ringing the bell over and over again and using the scientific method and trying to prove this. So there's been researchers and scientists and stuff that have passed away. Wouldn't you think that if somebody on the other side had studied this during their lifetime, wouldn't they want to come forward from the spirit side and do those experiments and research over there? What's stopping someone from doing that?
So, I mean, this begs the question, you know, because we don't have that ability to, as you said, you know, there's some great minds who have left us. So you would think, say, hey, this is something new. Here's the thing. So, and then some of those are probably like guiding people to say, hey, go to this place. Here's this thing. And make the dots, you know, so they probably can't vocalize, say, hey, go to this place, find these notes, blah, blah, blah. Instead, you know, as at least when I do things with paranormal investigations, which is through like mediumship, you know, trying to understand like the evidence that is presented to me and then try and make those dots and hopefully, you know, like if we start investigating, say, Einstein, for example, and, you know, and kind of make those dots, it's like, oh, I don't know why, but I think we should be going to this little place. Oh, here's this piece of paper. What does this mean and everything? So it's trying to help to connect the dots that way, you know, because again, until we find ways to like actually communicate on the other side of the veil, we have so many things that we can work with at our disposal.
You know, one of the ones that pops to mind, you know, you being from Wisconsin as well, is Harry Houdini was to looking into all this and disproving it and all that. And he always said that there was an afterlife, that he would come back and try and communicate through that. And right in Wisconsin, or right in Appleton here, they try and do that every year on the anniversary. And so far as I know, they've never made contact with him. So here's an exact case of, you know, someone who said that they would come back and was very in depth into this, but still hasn't made that, you know, connection there.
Yeah, and I've talked to some friends about this also, who are also magicians, and they're also paranormal investigators. And we talk about Houdini for quite some time. And yes, I mean, he's the one that people kind of look towards and trying to like disprove like things don't happen and everything. However, while there have been things in the past, and when I say in the past, like the early 1900s, even the late 1800s, where there have been people trying to make a show out of things, you know, it's like table tipping is one of those things. Some people who may not know, there used to be a contraption that you can put underneath a table, and you know, and they would like cloth the table and everything, and then that person will kind of would just with their foot press it, so it'll make it look the table's actually tipping and everything, you know. So no one was the wiser. I'm like, oh my god, it's, you know, it's tipping and everything. But having done table tipping before, it's a real thing, you know, where there was 4 of us around a table, and you know, this table actually like started tipping and everything. My point here is that while you do have some, dare I say, atheists like Houdini trying to disprove something, there still has been things to suggest that, you know, communicating to the other side in some sort of fashion is possible.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I've witnessed several. Our mediums and stuff on my team are very good. They've come through with information that obviously they shouldn't have any access to if there isn't a afterworld or a spirit side or something that they're able to communicate through. So I know these things, you know, are possible and stuff. So there's definitely that evidence there. What do you think it is that we're still looking for? You know, if we have this evidence, we have you know, photographic evidence, we have EVPs, we have all that stuff. Why are we still digging into this? Why hasn't academia delved further, or do they just not care?
Well, now you're in my world right now, Barnaby. So now we're talking philosophy. So I don't try to push on the people like, hey, you need to get a degree in order to understand this stuff. You don't need to read every single philosopher, you know, because none of them works. Hannah Arendt is not going to help you. Parallel Monte is not going to help you. However, Nietzsche has something to say. There are great philosophers of religion has something to say. And so I feel like what we're trying to do, at least in my view, I try to do like 2 things. One, trying to understand the historical context of a certain location. So not only doing that archival research and everything, but when I'm at a location and there's human spirits there, is when I'm like, okay, so tell me or show me what your life was like here, you know, as well as what I'm also trying to understand is what happens to us when we pass. Are we just balls of energy that when we pass, you know, if physics holds true, that our energy transfers to something else? Or, and this is the thing I hope happens, is the Buddhist way of thinking that, you know, when we pass, we're part of the ocean of the collective, you know. But when we pass, we're just among the ocean of everyone else. And, you know, and if it happens, it happens. So we're trying to understand that too. So we're trying to understand what an afterlife is and everything, as well as trying to understand the context of the human spirits that are with us, because it's not just haunted locations like a Waverly Hills or an East State Penitentiary. There's ghosts everywhere. There's someone at someone's apartment. There's some, you know, some building that now has been upscaled to something else, and that's also haunted, you know. Conover Square in Oregon, Illinois, that used to be a piano factory, and now it is an antique store. You mean to tell me objects don't hold something, and now you have a whole collection of spirits there? And believe me, like myself and others who have gone there, like, it's a weird feeling. It's like, oh my God, like there is like, I'm getting this feeling and that feeling and this feeling, and I'm just walking past like magazines from the 1970s, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, look, stuff from the 90s. So yeah, we're trying to understand like what happens to us once we pass, but also trying to understand the context of human spirits at certain locations too.
Interesting. So we have a couple questions here. We are live. I'm going to swing through this one. This one's pretty long, so I'm going to try and read through this. Have you heard of the Society for psycholic research? Founded in London, 1882, is the first organization to conduct scholarly research into the psychic and paranormal phenomenon. It aims to gather information and foster understanding through research and education without holding any corporate views on the existence or meaning of these phenomenons. According to the SPR has a history of attracting prominent figures in science, philosophy, some through the Julian Helix, have resigned due to concerns about the lack of scientific rigor. Does the U.S. have something like this?
No. However, there have been. So Harvard and Yale, if not Columbia, tried to do something similar to that. So like when these Ivy League schools started popping up, and trying to model off of schools like Oxford and Cambridge and this society that this person is talking about, they try to replicate this thing, and so they try to bring parapsychology over and what have you. But over time, they kind of moved that away and started doing, like, okay, this is not a legitimate form of an academic discipline, so we're going to push this away. That being said, there are like not degree programs. There are degree programs, but there's academic fields that do talk a lot about the supernatural and the metaphysical. If one studies, cultural studies, you will talk about things of, what happens in the United States and Europe and Africa, Asia and Latin America and the Caribbean when it comes to certain things. And then there's people who go into these degree programs and this is like their area of research and everything, even like history. I have colleagues in history that teach about witches. There's a whole seminar at the University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee, one of my colleagues. It's nothing about witches, and it's not only a cultural thing, we're trying to understand the cultural history of witches and everything, but let's also look at it from a possible feminist perspective. There's also a political perspective of it as well and everything. And how the depiction of witches became to be and everything. I used to do a class before. It was pretty much about like vampires. It was a unit, and I showed them like, here's Bram Stoker's Dracula, a fictitious book. But in places like Eastern Europe, there's like, no, this is real. And they're like, no, it's just an Irish author just saying this thing. They're going, no, come here. And people started like, and this again, pulling people's graves up and like, look, long hair, long nails. This is a vampire. It's like, and now we know it's like, well, that's biology. That's what happens. But that stems from, people think they're actual vampires and actually putting like iron gates over graves so they can stay there, So all this to say is like people like study this to understand, like, is there something called a vampire, or what is this cultural phenomenon that we should know about and everything? UAPs is not a good one. People like will study about it, but like for me, when I look at it, I look at it from the politics perspective, because what is the government trying to tell us or not tell us? Why are certain pieces of legislation written that has not been brought forward to the media and everything? I know you talk about this a lot, Barnaby, and I know you have various information about this, but like there's like even specific like whistleblower protection for those who are trying to do stuff. Like, why is that a thing versus something else? So all of this again is like bringing in other academic disciplines to kind of cultivate something that the society over in London used to do and everything. So it's trying to utilize these as tools to further understand the things that around us.
You talked about the class and the witches and stuff like that. But do they teach witchcraft? It's not like a Hogwarts class. They're not teaching you how to do it. They're looking at it from more of a
Yes,
broader aspect.
correct.
You know what I mean?
Correct. So they don't do magic. They don't teach magic with a K. But I knew some students that were into that, so it was like right up their alley. So I'm sure one of them wrote a paper about witchcraft and all that. So, and knowing my colleague, they were okay with that. So, but yeah, so it's nothing like that. But as I tell my students, I'm like you're in a laboratory, at least in the social sciences, you're in a laboratory to experiment what you want to research. So if you want to understand, like, does obsidian have any energy to it if I put it on my throat chakra? You can do that as an experiment if you want to. There's nothing stopping you from doing that. So like that's like my whole point is like, at least in students in academia, like encouraging them to like, if this is something that you want to do it and everything. But for those of us who are outside of academia now, it's like, okay, utilize basic scientific methods. What does other research approaches give us in order to like conduct the most effective research that we can to understand things?
There have been other well, let's see here. There's a comment here as well. Let's see. The SIR and Monroe Institute have worked on the SIR was Stanford Research Institute.
Okay.
What do you call it? Black budget ops on this. So done research and stuff like that. And let's see. I thought I tagged things, but I guess not. Well, I guess this is Techno Shaman says also that the government has worked on all this and still does, and they cover up a lot. Well, that's a broad statement as far as like covering up a lot, but it's true. The government has worked on things like remote viewing and all of the psychology and telekinesis and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
They've, you can look at the declassified documents on all this stuff, and basically they say, yes, it's real, but it's not reliable enough to, what do you call it? Move on, to activate on,
Yeah.
As far as remote viewing, like they can get the target, but unless it's an actual GPS location, they can't go in and do anything about it. They can just tell broad information. So it's not reliable enough to continue that with. But
did you ever see the movie Men Who Stare at Goats?
I believe so, yes.
I mean, it's a funny film, but I bring that up because that's also another movie about the Pentagon budgeting to kill people with their minds, and they did it with goats. If they can kill a goat and everything, and again, they use money to do this, and yet we could be doing it with other kinds of research out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very interesting when you get into the government side of this. You know, there's the whole all of the UAP stuff that we're talking about now in Congress and everything stems back, honest to God, from Skinwalker Ranch, because
and I've heard you mention that before, and I'd like to know more about that.
So they NIDS, the National Institute for Discovery Science, which was Robert Bigelow's group, purchased Skinwalker Ranch and was doing research, and they wrote the book The Hunt for the Skinwalker. And a couple people in the government got a hold of this book and said, well, this is really interesting, and if this stuff is real, we need to be studying this. So they put together this $22 million contract and wrote it out there for anybody that wanted to bid on it. And Robert Bigelow bid on it and created BASS, which is Bigelow Aerospace Space something studies. It escapes me. There's too many letter acronym things and stuff, but he created BASS, and they got this government contract to literally $22 million to study Skinwalker Ranch. And that's the missing documentation that we don't have access to between NIDS and what they're doing at Skinwalker Ranch now. But that whole thing was to research everything from, you know, remote viewing to telekinesis and UFOs, UAPs, portals, all of this phenomenon that was going on at Skinwalker Ranch and in Las Vegas. Because Bigelow owned, well, probably still does, but Bigelow had two different, had Skinwalker and a couple other properties as well as a control lab in Vegas where he could do like plant experiments, and they would have the same group of seedlings they would put in Vegas as a control, as well as ship out to Skinwalker Ranch or the other properties and stuff that he had owned in that. So they were doing all of this actual scientific research for, I want to say it's like 5 years or something was the total length of it. It was from 2007 to 2012 or something like that. And that ended up leading to more, and that rolled into OSAP and ATIP and continued on to the UAP task force and rolls on to what we are doing today. But that's where it all started was Bigelow and that.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I mean, this is like fascinates me, like how these things are not only the connections, but the entanglements of various things. I'm sure if you pull that apart, then you're going to find this, you're going to find that and everything. And this is what I like about, you know, researching, you know, things about the government, you know, because as someone who's in a prior life spent quite a bit of time in politics, I had to raise my eyebrow quite a few times. I'm like, what's this? Like, you don't need to know. I'm like, what? Like, this is a thing? They go, yeah. I'm like, okay, I think we should know this.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like, well, you're not in the circle. I'm like, I want to be in the circle. I want to know, I want to know what's going on, you know? So yeah, it's just so bizarre at times, like what the government does and everything. I remember talking to, like, I had some friends who were like in the Air Force, and from time to time, kind of jokingly, I was like, oh, you probably see UFOs when you do your, you know, flight training. And they're like, we can't talk about that. And I go, what do you mean? He goes, I'm just going to say, I have seen things. I have no idea what they were, but I just really can't say anything else about it. And I'm like,
mm-hmm.
I think you can. I think you can do that. You know, I mean, I it's very curious to me as to, like, what people see and like what happens and what have you.
Mhm. Oh yeah. Well, I mean, like all of the governments, have to be involved in this stuff. I mean, you look even back to World War I, World War II and stuff with Hitler.
Mhm.
Hitler was very into the occult and the paranormal and spent a lot of money researching everything from UFOs to the Ark of the Covenant and the crystal skulls and all this stuff. And this is, well documented that they went around and looked for these stuff. He sent expeditions out trying to find these specific artifacts and researching and all that stuff. So you have more further evidence that these different government organizations and stuff have done the research. But when somebody in the private industry tries to do these research, they just get marked with ridicule and like, well, why are you researching that? Same as like like the cryptids and stuff too. There's all these people that are interested in it, but like you said yourself, if you bring it up or something, your colleagues just look at you like, you're crazy. What are you talking about that stuff for?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. I remember having one colleague. We happened to talk about Bigfoot, and they looked at me. It's like, well, you don't believe Bigfoot, right? And I go, it's a possibility. And they're going, what? I go. Our job as academics is to question things, but I mean, as I told them, it's like there's things in the ocean we have no idea what's in the deep parts of the ocean. We have no idea what's going out in the sky and outside of our planet, So it's very much a possibility that some humanoid hairy beast is roaming somewhere, and there's a lot of land that we have never really like expedited, quite honestly, because we only live on 30% of the land in the United States. So that means there's a whole vast of land. We have no idea what's going out there.
Mm-hmm.
So it's much of a possibility, but it goes back to, I mean, until I see a Bigfoot, then it's like, cool, awesome. Now we need to know more about this, and so this is where like I get like, it's my slight skepticism yet idealism when it comes to Bigfoot, because until we actually see something, then there's like further questions I have. But as I said, there's very much a possibility because of things that we see throughout history, how humans started to evolve over the years, and even certain apes evolve over the year. There's has to be a possibility. I mean, I just saw something 2 days ago somewhere in Asia where they found like a skeleton of what they call a pixie.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, okay, so we fully even haven't found like those kinds of things, so there's so much to our history as humans that we haven't really like tapped into as much. We just only know the things that we know now and normalized it, but we continually have to question. There has to be more out there, if at all.
Mm-hmm. Well, a lot of that stuff, the pixies and the leprechauns and the wee folk,
Yeah,
and all the stuff from Ireland and Europe and stuff like that, that is academic, right? This is what it is. This is things that have happened. These are, our folklore, mythology, our stories, and that. And there's this huge disconnect between the stories and everything that has been passed down for generation to generation and known versus modern science says it doesn't exist.
Yes. And now you're in my second wheelhouse in academia,
I'm
which is
keep rolling right there.
So as I've told my students before, like when it comes to like academic research, it hasn't been the best. There is even, dare I say, well, it's actually out there. There's a lot of implicit bias when it comes to research and everything. So there's this one method in research called ethnography. The idea of ethnography is you're essentially observing a community of some sort. That, however, became a very like racist thing in terms of white British researcher goes to Africa, studies, say, African tribe, then they go back to, say, Oxford, and then they write not only their experiences, but they also write what that tribe's history is without even a conversation with anyone from the tribe. No translator, nothing else. So there's only that particular narrative. That has gone on for centuries. We've tried to correct that, obviously, or we try to at least. But even like when it comes to cryptids and the supernatural, we only are given a certain perspective of things, you know, and there's even gatekeepers in academia. It's like, well, we see you, but since we don't know, we have to write it this way.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, yeah, but let's actually try to leave it open to an imagination instead of saying and then write it off. It's like, well, you know, there's this thing called Loch Ness Monster. There's this, however, no one has really seen it, so therefore it's just a myth. Mm-hmm. You know, but even those oral histories from places like Africa, Latin America, Asia, Europe, and even here in North America, like those oral histories that sometimes don't take it into consideration also. You know, I've had many conversations with folks who have practiced hoodoo, voodoo, Santeria, you know, and how that's been passed down for generations and generations and generations, you know. Even indigenous folks who talks about thunderbirds, you know, and how thunderbirds is still a thing. And I'm trying to learn more. Like, I'm like, so tell me more about this, you know. I mean, is it real? He goes, oh yeah, this is real, but this is why they come through and everything. So like, even in academia, like oral histories kind of get dismissed and everything. In fact, here's a great example. Like in history, the academic field of history, there are historians who says if it's not written down, it's not history. So even in history, there's a division of if it's not written down, if it's not in the archives, it's not history. So we're going to dismiss cultures and other lived experiences because it's not been written down. Mm-hmm. And that's like asinine to me.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's very, you know, the history is written by the winners. You know, yeah. It's not a true account of what happened. It's one person's opinion that wrote it down. And to keep this whatever, politically correct, using like Marvel for an example. Mm-hmm. So if you look at like some of the characters in Marvel, these super villains that are out there that are destroying the world or trying to take it over, and you're cheering for the hero to come and take them down. If you look at the backstories of some of those villains, it's very sad. Like they were ridiculed or something, and they were trying to do good science for the benefit of the world, and something went wrong and they turned themselves into a giant lizard, and now everyone hates them. So they're the bad guy, you know. And so many times in just Marvel, again, for those instances, is you have these good scientific people that something bad happened and now they're considered the villain, even though they're really not. They didn't do anything wrong or anything bad. But that's how, you know, our history, that's how our science looks at a lot of things in real life, that, you know, well, this happened and now, well, we won, so we're going to write it the way that we want.
Right. There's this famous experiment that happened, and I'm going to get the year wrong. So if anyone out there listening, please correct me. I think it was 1909. It was at Harvard, and it was a medical researcher, and he wanted to weigh. He wanted to know if soul had weight.
Yep.
Which then became the famous 20-gram experiment. And if I recall, he had about 10 people who were about to pass, and they weighed them before they passed, and they weighed them after they passed. And there was this theme of 20 grams of weight was lost. That was a one-time thing, and in quantitative research, we have to try to replicate this to make sure this is like not a one-off thing. This is not an anomaly and everything, but no one picked it up.
Mm-hmm.
No one wanted to do it. And this is like done at Harvard, So you're telling me like no one wanted to pick this up because like this thing happened and you don't want to like disprove or maybe try to prove this thing happened? So yeah, even something like that. And it's always been referenced a lot of times. And every time I bring it up to like some of my science friends, they're like, well, that was one off. I'm like, yeah, but y'all didn't pick it up. So you can call it a one off.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Like, so why aren't we doing that? Why, if that, study was done, and Lee, by the way, he says it was 1907, 21 grams.
Oh, thank you.
Specific.
Thank you.
Duncan McDougall. There you go. Lee is my backstage research fact checker. So there you go. But why hasn't anyone? Why isn't that important? If so many people are, let me ask you this: if from an academic standpoint, then if all this stuff, we've heard it before that there's this, religious aspect to all this stuff. Do you think that the reason why all this academic stuff isn't being studied or is kind of like blacklisted for study or whatever is because it's going to be this huge paradigm shift that's going to bother our religious aspects?
So I think religion does play a role, but let's put that off to the side for a second.
Sure.
I also think it's people are just scared. I think people are just scared that our realities are not going to be what we think reality is. We have studied animals so much to the point that we know certain animals see certain different colors. They even see things that we can't see. They hear things that we can't hear. So, and because of that, their reality is different from ours. So even if we try to understand, like, well, if they picked up the 21-gram experiment and ran with it, and it did thousands of folks, then that could be like a very scary thing. Like it's going to open a paradox. Like, well, okay, so what does this mean? Now, I should say there's these things called ethics. So sometimes in academia, there's institutional review boards over the years have been also kind of squeamish for the kind of things. And I gotta say, there is something to be said about doing that kind of human experimentation. It kind of does cross a somewhat ethical line, but that's still a conversation. Like, I hate to be crude like this. They're about to die, and they're willing to do it in the name of science. So, but there is something to be said for that, So we have to be somewhat mindful of like the ethics of that. The religion aspect. I think people are scared that religion might be right on something. Now, which religion? That's up for debate, But I think they're all correct, because it's all about, at least Abrahamic religions, know like what the outcome is going to be in their field and everything. And so I think there is that. also is they don't want to legitimize religion to some degree, because if that's the case, then, and I know this is probably a stretch here, but if this 21 gram experiment's correct, did that mean Jesus actually like rise from the dead and went to somewhere called heaven? But again, that's like up for conversation and everything. So yeah, I think there's like multiple things that are in play here. You know, it's a religious factor. There's an ethical factor. But I think it's also people are just scared that, you know, if we kind of open a somewhat Pandora's box about this, that this is not what we all think this is and everything. You know, it's not quite the Matrix in my view, but there's something to be said where if I'm going to a forest and it's really like not vibing with me because I think something is in play here, you know, call it elementals, call it the energy of the forest, whatever the case may be. Like if we don't understand like this is a thing, then I think people are just like, you know, there's gonna be mass hysteria about it. But I mean, we've had different things like this before, so I just say let's just see what the possibilities are, because I think we haven't scratched the surface, in my view, of what this thing that we call reality is.
What are your thoughts, Lee? You got to look this one up for me too. Again, I never remember, but there was this experiment that was done again in a laboratory setting where they tried to create an entity, and they gave this person a whole backstory. They gave them all this stuff of how they died, where they died, all this stuff, and then they used the, you know, Ouija board or technology or whatever to have a conversation. And this entity that claimed to be that person who they completely made up came through. So when you're talking about these scientific research, you know, that of which we study, we also change and affect. How do we avoid manipulating the stuff that we're studying? How do we know that it's a soul of another person coming through and not something that we've created? And if we've created it, what does that mean to all this?
So I think there's like a couple of things there. The first is the question of if we're at a location, I'm going to pick on Velisca again. So if we're at Velisca, like, is it really the Moore family in that house, or have we bring our own energies in there and we create something? Or, you know, we go into, say, a barn, and you and I and others saying, oh no, like this is an Amish ghost, and their name is Ezekiel, and they died at 36 and everything, and all of a sudden we do an EVP session, and it's like, hi, I'm Ezekiel. You know, like, is that really Ezekiel, or did we conjure this up? Because I've heard this before about the Stanley Hotel, where there's nothing going on there, and people are like, oh no, there's a woman in a red dress, and all of a sudden they see the woman with a red dress. So that's something that's always interested in me, is doing that as an experimentation. Because I mean, it's one of those questions again, that what is that reality? What is, you know, what's going on here with the spirits and everything? And even if there's something more, I know this word gets used around a lot, so I'm not trying to use it in this way, but demonic, you know, even if that's something there, then what does that mean? You know, I mean, is there something non-human And I think that's the other thing with your earlier question. If there's things that are non-human that we can't see, then what are we in? You know, is this purgatory? Is this hell? Is this heaven? You know? And I think we should like strip away those labels and say, like, we live on something that we fully have not explained yet. Because we live on a floating rock, and this rock has more energetic properties that we have not even tried to further expand on.
Yeah. I mean, you know, there's so many ways we can go with this conversation. I mean, this has been absolutely fascinating here. Yeah, I how do you know that, you know, I always warn people when they talk about doing paranormal research and stuff like that, that, you know, you go to a cemetery and you try and talk to your grandma. Well, just because your grandma shows up and knows things or says things doesn't mean that that's what's there. Because as you said, there's a lot of other things out there that, you know, from our aspect of research and stuff that we believe in, that are going to say, oh yes, I'm your grandma, and they're gonna, you know, come home with you, and you invite them to, you know, do these things. And this is where people have these problems. And when you bring that aspect into it, now you've opened this whole thing up of anywhere that you go, when a spirit that legitimately is a family member or something comes through, how do you know that that is your family member? How do you trust any of the research and any of the findings that we have on any of these cases? Right?
You had to ask the hard questions, don't you?
Oh yeah, that's what we're here for.
So this is honestly not. There's not one best answer for this, and I'm being very truthful, because there isn't. Because for me, is I have to rely on my intuition, my evidential mediumship, to trust that I'm talking to my grandma. And it's because of, and I'm going to tell you the other end of what I'm about to say here. It's because of a certain feeling I have. There's a certain sensations I have. And I see certain things of my grandma to know that I'm talking to my dead grandma. The other side of it for sure can say, well, you're just remembering the good times, those sensations and all that, to say that's your grandma. I go, for sure, but that's all we have. You know? And it kind of goes back to like shadow people, shadow figures. You know, all of us have seen a human. All of us know what a certain shape of a human looks like. So when we see a shadow figure at like an Ashmore Estates or anywhere else, that's the only thing we know, because that's what our brain tells us. Because our brain tells us, oh, this is a human. You know, and if they walk on fours, then it's, you know, depending on the location, you know, it could be something else. It could be a dog, but right now it looks like a human. So that's all our brain knows, because that's the kind of reality. That's the things we've been conditioned for over the years. I used to do this thing with people before we do like night hikes, is like when the sun's about to set and there's still light out, I would have them grab a partner and then move across like 5-6 feet from one another and look at their face. And then they don't see a face. And they go, what is going on here? I go, the light, our eyes can pick up certain light and everything. So we don't see a face, but our brain says, well, there's an eyes in there somewhere. There's a nose in there somewhere. There's a mouth somewhere there. So it's trying to put together a shape that we're conditioned to, you know? So for sure, like there are things out there that we don't know, but again, speaking for myself, I have to rely on my intuition and mediumship to say, this is my dead grandmother, this is your Aunt Brenda, whatever the case may be.
Absolutely. No, that's a really good point. You know, there's the mirror experiment as well that, you know, reminds me of that too. You know, if you stare long enough into a mirror and look at yourself, your face, your features start to melt and change and
Yeah.
distort. And we've actually tried that on an experiment, and it's true. Like it gets really weird, and it's just your brain starts playing these tricks on you. The other thing I wanted to bring up on that is, you know, when it's a really good point, because your brain is conditioned to recognize things that it recognizes, right? That it can associate things that it doesn't know. It tries to put a label to, and this is absolutely fascinating because if you go back and read older literature, you know, John Keel, John Green, all the older researchers and stuff in the field, you hear the stories talking about these things that people saw. And it's so much more important to me to hear those stories than the modern day stuff, because nowadays we have all these TV shows and all these things that people can go, oh, that's a shadow person. This is the Hat Man. This is a gray alien. This is a reptilian. And you have those different things, and we have names for them now. So your brain automatically jumps to that conclusion. But back in the day, before all these things had names, before we had all the TV shows, we had what we saw, and you had to rely on the description of what your brain was looking at rather than what it thinks it sees. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, it does. And as my doctor friend says, you know, the human body is stupid. Because we have this organ that's 5 pounds right here that not only makes us like be who we are, but the perceptions of things, you know, and this is also kind of like the debates that we have about the paranormal being legitimate or not, because how do we know it's that dead person? How do we know it's a shadow figure? So forth and so forth, you know? But at the same token, it's like, well, did you not see this ball move across the floor 6 times? Oh, yeah. Okay. Is there an air draft? No. Okay. Is the floor warped? No. Okay. So what else could it be? I mean, is it motorized? Is there a weight in the ball? You know? So what some people sometimes think is gray area can be very, very quickly, I'm like, it's either this or that. I don't know what to tell you, you know? I mean, you, for sure, here's the evidence, here's the information, do what you want with this, you know? But as I've taken people to different paranormal locations, is when they'll give me a look and I go, I'm telling you, it's either it is or it isn't. That's all. I mean, that's at the end of the day, that's the question it becomes. You saw something, you heard something, you experienced something. So you tell me.
It's like we do the paranormal tours up here as well, and you know, there's all these different pieces of equipment, and if you don't understand the piece of equipment, you don't understand how it works and why these things are significant. I mean, that's the main thing too, is, you know, people that see these things on TV and they're like, oh, an EMF meter, I have to have one of those to go ghost hunting, and when it lights up, there's a ghost there. No, it does not mean that. You need to know what that EMF meter does, how it works, and then understand that when there is no electromagnetic field and it lights up, then you have something, and all of these different pieces of equipment are so much more valuable once you learn how they work and what does trigger them and what doesn't, because then you can say, well, the REM pod's going off because there's high EMF. No, those two are not connected at all. So when your EMF meter goes off and your REM pod goes off and they're sitting right next to each other, nothing should trigger the two of those together at the same time. So what did that? And this is the stuff that people that are paranormal investigators and stuff need to spend a little bit more time researching your equipment and how it works, because the evidence that you're putting out can be so much more valuable and important and stuff when you actually understand what's happening there.
Yeah. When I first started doing the paranormal, I was into the equipment.
Mm-hmm.
I needed the EMF meter. I needed the REM pod. I needed this certain camera, whatever the case may be, right? And then I was like, no. This is when I first started out. I started doing paranormal probably 1998. Living in the rural area of Illinois, Northwest Illinois. And so I've heard about this stuff, but I sometimes relied on my intuition. And then over the years, started just using pendulums, and to this day, I have people will come in with cases of equipment, which again is fine and good. We need that, but I start waltzing in there and they're like, oh, that's AJ. They just use their hands and a pendulum. And I go, yeah, but don't say in a way like as if I'm like the apex of it. These are my tools, but I also want something to back me up on it. I'm feeling something cold right here. Yeah. This EMF detector's going on. Okay. What do you see on the camera? Yeah. There's a cold spot right next to you, so we have to have this kind of what we call triangles, this triangle to like figure this stuff out, because if you just rely on AJ doing intuition, it's really not going to help you. It's just based on what I'm sensing, you can be standing there and you absolutely get nothing, so yeah, I don't feel it's one way or another. We all need to encapsulate all these kind of techniques in order to understand when we're investigating the paranormal.
I totally get that. I have some really good mediums on my team, and I said it has completely ruined the way that we investigate paranormal, because we'll go into somebody's house and we get permission to film for our YouTube and stuff, and we'll go in and we'll take the tour with the client, and they'll say, this happened, this happened, this happened, this is what's kind of going on. And then my medium walks in and they say, this happened, this happened, this happened, this is what's going on. And when the two stories mesh up and I say, okay, so what's the problem? And they go, this is what we need to do. All right, we're done. Case closed. We can move on. It's like, what more do we need to do? And the people in the house are like, well, don't you need to do anything? Or, like this. I'm like, no, they pretty much got it covered. They said everything you did. They know what's going on. This is what we're going to do about it, and they're like, yeah, it takes all the fun out of throwing, cases and cases and thousands of dollars worth of equipment out on the floor and hoping to get something when, but it does validate, like you said, that when my psychics and mediums come in and say, I'm feeling this, I'm seeing this, and then the equipment up at the same time. And absolutely.
Oh yeah. There was this one team over by the Quad Cities. They brought me over and EMF meters were going off and there's something else going off and everything. I'm like, oh, this is a very active location. We're going to see anything. And I walked in, I'm like, I got nothing. I get a house, and that's about it. And they're like, no, this is going off. I'm like, well, your EMF is like right next to the panel. They go, oh yeah. I'm like, so I think we're done. We can wrap it up.
Yeah. Sometimes, we do the paranormal tours and stuff, and it's so hard to tell people that they're wrong because they're so excited about their evidence and stuff. And
Oh my God.
we had a case where a team came in and they were doing the SLR cameras, and we have a stage, and it's very shiny and reflective. And one of their investigators standing at the edge of the stage, and it's reflecting their shadow onto the stage, and the SLR camera is picking it up as another person there. So there's literally two people standing there, and they're all excited because this thing is on the stage. And I'm like, that's just picking up the reflection. Oh, well, whatever. As long as you're having a good time. I mean, it's not my evidence, so I guess, debunk a little harder next time. But yeah.
There's this place, you've probably heard of it, if not been there, Shakers in Milwaukee. A friend of mine took me there. I've never been to Shakers. I lived in Milwaukee totally for 7 years. Never been to Shakers. And so they're like, I'm going to take you to Shakers. I'm like, fine, whatever. And so we get there and we sit down. He goes, so what do you think? I go, I feel pissed off. They go, why? I go, I don't know. I just feel very irked that I go, what is this place again? Other than a cigar bar? It's like, oh, and they're like doing tours. I go, oh, it's haunted, and they do ghost tours every hour and all this. And I go, where are they saying? It's like, oh, that spot over there. I'm like, no, there's a person over there. Staying in the corner. I don't know why they're doing that. I just feel like the spirits are just angry. And then everyone's saying, oh no, these are happy ghosts. I'm like, no. I mean, we're talking about a place that is, I think if I remember right, the mob or aspects of the mob ran it at some point. I knew it was a brothel, and there was something else going on there. So I'm like, we're talking like spirits who never led a happy life, quite honestly, and then you have this business essentially saying it's like, oh yeah, like they enjoy people being here. I'm like, you sure about that?
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm getting.
Yep. Paranormal tourism. Anyway.
Yeah.
Oh man, it has been absolutely a blast chatting with you, and I don't want to keep you, from your other stuff today. But so before we wrap up, tell everyone, you mentioned at the beginning some of the stuff that you had coming up, some investigations, and that. Where can people find you? Events that you're going to be at, all that stuff.
Yeah. So I'm on the socials. So Facebook, I'm the Mystic Scholar. So you can find me on there. I'm also on Instagram, Mystic Scholar. I think it's Mystic Scholar 1111. And I have a website, mystics-scholar.com, and that's where I post upcoming events, classes I probably will be doing, and even just like my thoughts about stuff and everything. So yeah, and I have this, if you're in Milwaukee or if you're near Milwaukee, Brumder Mansion, this Saturday, 6:00 as a paranormal meetup. It's just for other folks just to like gather, socialize and everything, and then do like a little mini investigation in a haunted location in Milwaukee and everything. And yeah, hit me up. I do, I do card reading, I do mediumship, so I offer those services. I love to collaborate with other people, do paranormal investigations, so I'm always down with that. I'm always booking a trip somewhere. And I'll also be, like I said, offering classes about, the occult, the paranormal, things of that nature. So go to the website, go to Facebook, go to Insta. I'm there. I'm here.
Sounds good, man. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. It's been an absolute terrific conversation. I mean,
this is such a great time. I mean, I love that you're doing this, and for you reaching out. I mean, I have shown my friend. I'm like, is this real? Like, is Barnaby actually? I'm like, okay, I'm fine. If this is a scam, this is gonna be the best scam ever. So it's an honor for you asking me, and I hopefully to come back.
Absolutely, yeah. As long as your check clears for being on this week, yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
You just send me the fees for being on the show and the advertising. Yeah, no, it's cool. Send $1.99 in response to
Right.
No, it's been an absolute pleasure, man, chatting with you. Like it's been a great show, great conversation. Thank you so much.
I'm glad. Thank you.
Absolutely. All right, man. I will talk to you later. Take care.
All right. See you. Bye.
All right, guys, that is our show for this week. Hopefully you enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun here and covered a lot of topics. So I think it's been pretty good today. So if you guys have any questions or comments for me on the show, send them to wisconsincaps@gmail.com. If you'd like to be on the show, send me an email at wisconsincaps.com and we'll see what we can do. All right, guys, that is our show for this week. Thank you all for watching, liking, and subscribing. All things here on the Untold Radio Network and Cryptids, Anomalies, and the Paranormal Society. Head on over to the show notes here to get the links for all of my guests today on the show. And until next week, hopefully I can find my voice again. And we'll see you next time. Take care, guys. Be well. I'll see you next week.
You seem to know something I don't. What's going on?